Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Emily Kittrell, and on behalf of my colleagues at NISTS, Janet, Judith, and Joe, thank you for joining us for this very special pre-release party for the revised edition of the Transfer Playbook. Now, I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a moment, but first I need to cover a couple of important logistics just before we get started. So first and foremost, yes, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll share a link to that video with all registrants early next week. If you need to duck out or you want to share this information with your coworkers, no worries, we've got you. Just stay tuned for those future communications. Second, there are several hundred of us on today's call, which is very exciting, but we don't want you to let that stop you from participating in the discussion. The chat is open as you found, so please feel free to add your thoughts and engage with each other over there. If you have questions, please let us know. But rather than put them in the chat, please use that QA box down at the bottom of your toolbar. You should have it there. We will see them there and respond to them there. There's also the opportunity for you to submit anonymously if you choose, or you can add your name. You can also upvote the questions that you really want us to address as long as there's time. So please feel free to engage with that. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't take just a very tiny quick moment to situate this moment in time just a little bit, particularly for any new to transfer folks joining us today. So you see, although the transfer pathway itself dates back to literally 1901, truly transfer-focused research wasn't really a thing until about the 2000s. Things picked up tremendously around the 2010s, and we saw lots of really important transfer-focused concepts like transfer agents, transfer capital, transfer receptive culture, so on. And some of those scholars are on the call with us today, so give them a shout out in the chat if you want. But we've really started to understand some of the reasons transfer outcomes data wasn't as positive as we'd like. But it wasn't until the Transfer Playbook first came out in 2016 that we had an actual roadmap for making things better. It not only centered the transfer experience and data, it also very blatantly built on previous research and called on both community colleges and universities to share responsibility for transfer student success. The rest, they say, is history. The playbook has become an absolutely foundational resource in our field, and we are so fortunate to have the researchers behind the second edition here to share how this work has evolved to meet today's transfer challenges. I am beyond excited to learn alongside all of you about the updated frameworks and recommendations, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Tanya LaViolet from the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program and John Fink from the Community College Research Center to tell us more about their forthcoming publication. Welcome again. Thank you so much for being here. And John and Tanya, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily, for organizing this webinar and bringing together over now 300 people on the line to hear about this second edition of the Transfer Playbook research. So before I turn it over to my colleague, John, who's going to walk us through some really exciting data that you may or may not have seen before, but really makes the case for this work and the importance of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. I just wanted to set the stage for what this is. So you'll notice on this title slide, this is session 1 out of 4. So consider this session that John and I are leading to be kind of the appetizer in a 4-course meal that is going to span 4 months. And so an appetizer over 4 months might not be all that satisfying, but we are going to go over the playbook at a very high level. And what we can promise over the next 4 months is that we are going to be bringing in practitioner voices, those who are featured in the second edition of the playbook, to join us in these webinars, to share their own stories in their own words as they relate to the framework that we're going to be presenting here, so that you can get concrete, real-life examples of what we're synthesizing in the words that we're sharing today. And we just think it'll be so much more powerful coming from the folks who are doing the work on the day-to-day and are on the ground and can see the impact and share with you all of those little details that even in the depth of our multi-day site visits to the campuses that have strong and equitable outcomes for transfer students, that we might not be able to capture. So again, today is a kind of high-level overview, and we hope it piques your interest enough to come back for courses 3 through 4. So thank you so much for having us, and I'm going to turn it over to John to kick us off with some data.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks to the NISTS for hosting this. It's great to be with you all. My name is John Fink, and I work at the Community College Research Center, which is based at Teachers College, Columbia. And I've been here for about 10 years. And before that, I worked at the University of Maryland with community college transfers after they arrived to the university. And actually in 2013 was my first NISTS conference. I got sent there sort of as a new transfer professional to just sort of get the lay of the land. And I just haven't, wanted to let go since, because I just love this community, love working with you all. And that sort of passion got me really into the research and advocacy work, especially using national data to describe the need for investment and change and reform to strengthen transfer pathways. And in the next slide, a couple of slides, I just want to show you in the next one why we're focused on the vertical transfer pathway, both from the perspective of community colleges and our Community College Research Center. Upward transfer to a bachelor's is such a core part of our mission to broaden access and provide affordable post-secondary education. But we also think about social mobility, getting folks out of poverty, workforce development, talent development. It is just true that first, college degrees really matter. So I think that's an important message, just in terms of what is going on now and the increasing questioning of the value of higher education. And bachelor's degrees really matter for a range of outcomes. But in terms of just talking about getting a good job, something paying a living wage that has growth potential benefits and you kind of can make a career out of it. Bachelor's degrees is really what is delivering on the good jobs promise now and into the future. This is just showing the projection of good jobs into the 2030s, which was 10 years ago when we started presenting this, and feels like it's getting kind of closer now. Bachelor's degrees really matter. And the issue is that when you look at who has a bachelor's nationally, it's a third of adults, but it's even lower percents of low-income adults, Black adults, Latino adults. And so you have these really stark disparities in terms of who can have a bachelor's, and a lot of these students are enrolled at community colleges. So this is why we're focused. In the next slide, though, we show you that the system currently just isn't working very well. A lot of students come into a community college wanting to transfer, but only about a third of them ever enroll at a four-year institution within a 6-year time span. And after a 6-year point, fewer than a fifth, 16%, have completed a bachelor's. They've transferred and completed a bachelor's. And in the next slide, we've been looking at this. Actually, the first project I started at CCRC about 10 years ago, we looked at that 2007 cohort with National Student Clearinghouse data. And we've been sort of updating it with the clearinghouse since. And you can just see we're not really budging here. We're sort of maybe slightly increasing on the cohort bachelor completion rate, but it's hovering right around the same sort of numbers. So we have this challenge. We've been making efforts, but these outcomes have remained too low. And this is based on a report we did with Aspen and the clearinghouse earlier last year. And that provided a whole set of metrics, both for community colleges and 4 years. And I'll send you a link where you can look up your state's results. To summarize from that report in the next slide, what we found is that if you look at who makes the leap, the transfer out rate for community college students, it's low, it's a third, but it's even lower for these specific groups that are already underrepresented in terms of who has a bachelor's, the really sort of opportunity populations for growth and improvement. Black students, Hispanic, Native American, low income, working adults. Even the students who do transfer, this is the second one, the percent of transfer students who complete a bachelor's, it's fewer than half overall, and even worse for these groups. And so when you get to the end of the picture, 6 years later, looking at under 10% of some of these students, Black students, working adults, transferring and completing a bachelor's. So they're low outcomes with high disparities. And in the next slide, in the report, we also look to see, well, what happens after students transfer? So transfer students coming into the university. One interesting finding is that transfer students, community college transfers into universities, they actually have a really strong start. So the retention rates, they transfer in, what percent come back into that second year post transfer? It's in the 80s, and there are some disparities, but pretty high retention rates. And I remember this from working with transfer students, like they were like really motivated when they were there. They're really pumped. They're coming back. But what we also see is that this isn't translating into timely completion. If you look 2 years after transfer, 4 years after transfer, there's just not very high completion rates. Like 2 years after transfer, only about 18% of transfer students had completed a bachelor's. 4 years after transfer, it was about half of those community college transfers in had completed a bachelor's. So a strong start, but then something happens and we don't have a timely completion. So in the next couple of slides, I just want to point to what we saw from this national data that actually gives us a little bit of hope, might point to some levers for increasing these persistently low outcomes with high disparities. The first is that more and more community college transfer students are starting that transfer pathway in high school through high school dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment or dual credit. It has a lot of different names, but right now in community colleges, a fifth of their students are in high school. And in 10 states, a third or more of the community college students are in high school. There's 2 states, Indiana and Idaho. It's actually more than half of their community college enrollments are high school students. So if you're not thinking about the on-ramp into transfer to bachelor's degree starting in high school, you really should be, because more and more of this is happening. Like our colleague Aurelie Garcia-Tulloch is talking about this as like stealth transfer, because these students might be starting first time after high school, like freshmen, but they're sort of technically transfer students because they were at community college for dual enrollment in high school. But what's really important to know about this dual enrollment population we looked at nationally is, first off, the outcomes are much higher for students with prior dual enrollment. And yes, these are different students than who starts community college without dual enrollment, right? They've sort of gone into college courses in high school. They have that momentum. But this is the sort of scale or scope magnitude we need to have a substantial change, like 2 and 3 times the rate of transfer, of bachelor completion after transfer, and smaller disparities when we're looking at Black students that are transferring with prior dual enrollment or Hispanic students. So I think this is a really important sort of lever to think about. The other one in the next slide is just that we observed that many community college transfer students that had a prior award from the community college, like the associate degree, they are completing at much higher rates than students without a community college award. But nationally, most community college students don't transfer with an award, but the ones that do tend to do better. And I think this is important for our community college colleagues that really kind of rely on that associate degree and want to figure out ways to make that associate degree make sense for students because they're taking the right courses to get into the major. The last thing I'll just share with you is really what led us to this playbook work initially, which is that I've been presenting you all national averages, state averages. There's a lot of differences by state, but really no state is like really crushing it on these outcomes. Like the best state, they're like, we're number one. It's still like just a fifth of their students are transferring and getting a bachelor's degrees. Where you do see a lot more variation is at the college, the individual institution, and the partnership level. These are some very nerdy charts, super fun charts. These are the best because they show you individual college performance on these outcomes. Each dot is a college, and you have these different outcomes like the transfer out rate, the bachelor completion rate among transfers, and then the cohort bachelor completion rate for that starting community college cohort. And basically what you can see is and these are all states. So for each one of these states, there's variation, like some are much higher than others. So no matter like what state you're in, there is like possibility for improvement because there's some of your peer colleagues that are doing much better. And this is what really motivated our focus on, well, what's going on with all of these? Like you see that tiny one in Arizona that's up near like an 80% transfer out rate, or you see some of these outliers. And we did this whole sophisticated set of analyses to look at those outliers, but control for factors like institutional resources, student demographics, and other factors. So if we control for that, but you still see the outliers, like what is going on at these places? What are their practices? And this is what motivated the first transfer playbook and our follow-up, where we did an analysis for students overall, as well as the outliers for low income, for Black and Hispanic students. What can we find from these places? And then we visited a bunch of them, and that was really fun. And we learned a lot, which is what we wrote up in this playbook.
Thanks, John. So what I'm going to do now is transition from that data and share with you some of the findings from those outliers. And while in the data we might call them outliers, I just want to impress upon you all, that these successful colleges and partnerships were found all across the country. We found them in deserts, literally deserts, farmland, suburbia, right in the heart of some of the largest cities across the country. So transfer excellence can be found anywhere, in any context. And even though the data that John showed was in many ways sobering, I think the idea that you can find excellence in transfer anywhere, and that it really is through institutional practices that are making the difference, that provides a note of optimism and hope that we are not resigned to the outcomes that we've seen over the last decade. So let's dive into the heart of what you all are here for now, which is what we found across these examples of excellence across the nation. This represents around 200 hours of qualitative research interviews at high-performing community colleges and four-year institutions. And just a moment to say thank you to all of the leaders, practitioners, and students who gave their time, their valuable time working on transfer, and you see that it needs a lot of work, to spend that time with us to share their insights and their stories. And so this is what we learned from them. If I move, I'm in charge of moving the slides. Before we dive into the framework, I know I keep promising this framework, I want to share some general observations with you that really cut across the framework. And these are themes that you'll see play out across all components of it and all the practices. And I'm sure when the practitioners from each of the institutions come join us as well. So first and foremost, institutional proximity can be leveraged. Most community college transfer is happening in a local or regional way. Many students, either because they want to or they need to, stay close to home. And what that means is that we have to make sure that these proximate or neighboring local partnerships and pathways are as strong as they can be. But unfortunately, what we found in our research is that there are many partnerships, local partnerships, that are over-reliant on the fact that they are close by to each other to achieve strong outcomes. But the best partnerships, the excellent partnerships, leverage the fact that they were close by or created that proximity in order to serve their students better. And so they said, we're neighbors, let's make this the best partnership possible so our students have no guesswork about how to navigate the transfer pathway between us. Second, structures to support student choice and progression are needed alongside systems that lead to empathy at scale. So there are hundreds of decisions that a transfer student has to make on the course from, starting at a community college through graduating with a bachelor's degree. And so the structured support to make good choices that can support that affordable and timely degree transfer and degree completion, that's necessary. But what we heard from practitioners and students all across the country was that if those systems are not paired with people who care, people who are friendly and empathetic to the students who are going through what can be a very challenging experience, it's not going to produce the outcomes that you want. We need to have systems, and we need to have the people who care behind those systems. Third, the strongest partnerships include universal systems and initiatives that are often informed by what works for those who have been historically underserved by higher education. So we'll see this theme come up over and over again. I'm going to talk about it in terms of kind of not waiting for students to raise their hand, because that's when we begin to see the inequities in the outcomes emerge. And then finally, strong leadership is needed both at the mid-level and at the senior level. What we found time and time again is that hard-working practitioners, people boots on the ground or student-facing, we're doing a lot of heavy lifting, and one person can make a real difference in terms of achieving strong transfer student outcomes. Now, unfortunately, what we also found was that when that one person or group of people transition to somewhere else, because they're very talented, they're very hardworking and dedicated to their cause, they'll get other opportunities. Unfortunately, what happens is that their good work and those good outcomes leave with them. So where we find a real opportunity, especially for senior leadership, is working with these practitioners, this grassroots movement, to elevate what they are doing, to invest in it, and to systematize it across an institution in order to get to that scale at change, that change at scale. So those are general observations. Now, let's get into the framework. And some of this is going to look familiar because we did this research back in 2015, 2016, and there are some themes that remain intact, but we're able to provide a lot more detail, a lot more richness through the qualitative interviews that we did over this last year or so. So the three-part framework, pretty simple: prioritize transfer at the executive level to achieve that sustainable success at scale, align program pathways and high-quality instruction to promote timely bachelor's completion within a major. So you'll remember that slide that John presented with the 18% completion after 2 years, right? So what are the practices that we can put in place to accelerate that a little bit? And then tailor transfer advising and non-academic supports to foster trust and engagement. So what John and I are going to do now, are we're going to kind of briefly go over what are the essential practices within each of these strategic or strategy pillars in the playbook. And then again, over the course of the next few months, we'll be inviting those that are featured in the Transfer Playbook to join us in these webinars to share exactly some case studies or exactly what they did that reflect some of these high-level findings. So first, strategy 1, prioritizing transfer at the executive level to achieve sustainable success at scale. 3 essential practices within each strategy. The first one here, president-led, team-based, and well-resourced partnerships, end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience, and transfer student-centered systems and processes. And today, where I'm going to dive in is this idea of end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience. You saw the numbers. 33% transfer rate hasn't budged since the cohort of 2007. And we've moved from 14% bachelor's completion to 16% over that same time period. So we can't tinker around the margins anymore. We've got to do big reforms, systemic scaled reforms, in order to move the dial on those numbers that we've seen so that students are getting the opportunity that they deserve. And the way that we have found this happening in nature, the way we've characterized it, is this end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience. And what that is characterized by is what we're calling these transformational transfer models that are really extending beyond credit articulation. Credit articulation is an important component of transfer, but over the years, it has become the primary focus of a lot of transfer efforts. And what we find that transfer students need and what they say they need is beyond that. How do we support their full experience to be more positive, to be more supportive of their success from the time they start community college or even before through completion of a bachelor's degree? And so what those transformational models look like is that they're often, as I mentioned, proximity matters. They often include strategies that are tailored to regional needs and demographics. They include an every student could be a transfer student approach. So again, not waiting for students to raise their hand and say, I'm a transfer student, or I'm interested in being a transfer student. Because by that point, the disparities that John showed in the data, they're already beginning to emerge. So how can we begin to cultivate the interest in transfer, cultivate the knowledge in transfer early, and not wait for students to raise their hand? And then finally, in all the interviews that we did with students mentioned the importance of financial aid, of affordability, and their schools really paying attention to that in order to enable their success. In many ways, they chose the transfer pathway because it was more affordable and there were cost savings in comparison to going directly into a bachelor's program. Okay, so before I turn it over to John, I'm going to just share a few examples of what these transformational models look like in practice. And again, we'll have representatives from these schools join us to highlight in more detail some of their practices. But here are elements of transformational transfer models. So starting transfer in high school. We have an example from Imperial Valley College in California, where high school seniors are supported by IVC staff to not only complete a FAFSA and an application to IVC, which, there's a lot of early outreach work that's happening on that front across the country. What sets IVC's approach apart is that for students who get admitted to IVC, and they're an open access community college, those advisors are going to be working with students to develop an initial educational plan. So what courses am I going to take when I start community college? And they do that in the spring. It's uploaded to their student information system so that when they start, it's a running start. They know exactly what courses they're going to take. They're going to know how it applies to their transfer pathway. And they're doing that in high school. And that is for a student population that is 80% first generation. So again, trying to not wait until students raise their hand and say, I'm a transfer student. It's saying, here's what your pathway could look like. Is this right for you? Second, simplifying admissions. I'm sure many of you have heard of the advanced program between Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University, a dual admissions program with complimentary, dedicated advising and coaching, 4-year maps, co-enrollment. Another example is the CUNY John Jay Justice Academy, or CJA. It's from John Jay College of Criminal Justice and 6, I think now 7 community college partners. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this program is that students are auto-enrolled. If you are in a criminal justice program at one of those 6 or 7 community colleges, they're saying you get automatic qualification for joining this guaranteed admissions program. All you got to do is meet the standards and you're in. And again, that's not waiting for students to raise their hand. It's cultivating that interest early and making sure that students have the information and the pathways they need to succeed. Guaranteeing affordability, again, going back to Nova and Mason, the Mason Virginia Promise, which is a scholarship for Pell eligible advanced students, the Arkansas Transfer Achievement Scholarship, which helps students from Arkansas community colleges pay the same tuition rate that they would at the community college at the 4-year institution, again, trying to address those financial needs. Linking transfer to careers, so Virginia Commonwealth University and its partners developing these humanities and STEM pathways that are linking to advising, but not just advising, career coaching and guidance, so that they understand how these pathways are linking to careers, and especially for those first generation students who might not understand what the connection is between their program or major and their career goals. This is really helpful. And then finally, going back to that proximity matters, developing local talent. And we have examples from Arizona Western College and Northern Arizona University with the Yuma campus, which is on Arizona Western College's campus. And they don't just rely on being co-located, they build real programs to make sure that the students who could move between them are getting as much support as they need. And what we mean by transformational models is that, as you can see, a lot of these are multiple parts to them. So it's not just one thing. That's why they're transformational. That's why they're comprehensive and getting to that end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to John in a moment to go over our next pillar, but want to pause for a second and just take some questions about either the data that John shared or the first pillar about prioritizing transfer. All right, and John, I'm opening up the
Yeah, I see there's a couple on the data I can just address. So one question is here, like for the data in the analysis and perhaps the ranking to find sites, are we taking into account students who have dual enrollment or were in dual enrollment early middle college? when we did the sort of analysis to like identify sites to visit, we kind of had a dual focus, both on cohorts of students without prior dual enrollment, but then we also looked at partnerships that were doing really well in serving the cohorts with prior dual enrollment students coming into that pipeline. So we kind of layered it on, and we visited a set of sites, like some that had achieved strong outcomes for all students, for Black students and Latino students and low-income students, absent that sort of dual enrollment pipeline, and then some with that as a factor, because we wanted sort of a mix of looking at those sort of transformational models that are leveraging that dual enrollment on-ramp and those without. So that's a good question. And then about online programs, does this data account for online programs with in-person transfer enrollment? I'll just say on the online, one of the other findings from our tracking transfer, like national findings, is that like the types of four-year institutions with the lowest transfer outcomes were primarily online institutions and private for-profit institutions. And absolutely, that's just descriptive. Like students are sort of sorting into these different types of institutions, and they have like, when you see the institutions with the best outcomes were the most selective institutions, because they're sort of selecting for students. But I will say that it's also just a fact that these institutions have very, very low transfer outcomes we describe in the report. And there's other institutions like minority serving institutions, ANAPESIs, HSIs, that actually had very strong transfer outcomes regardless of their selectivity. And so that's what we did in terms of online. We also are describing in the playbook a couple really cool innovative models of using online education to better serve working adult students that have like technical or applied associate degree training from community colleges, like early childhood education applied associates, or teaching aid sort of folks that want to be teachers. And so the sort of second year of that bachelor's degree is offered online statewide, especially serving rural folks working in their communities. So that plus the nursing. So you got your nurses training at the associate's level, but to get to that bachelor's level, you need the sort of leadership management sort of training, kind of provided that as like a flipped bachelor's degree. So I think there's really cool innovative models happening out there that we try to lift up in this work.
And John, just building on that, jumping to the question about career focus in community colleges. So I'd say that we didn't interrogate this specifically at or in the data, but what we're finding, especially in our field work at a state level, is that there's growing interest from students who completed an applied associate degree, as John was mentioning, in transferring, once they get some work experience, or once they realize that the career path that they want requires that additional level of education. And so what we're finding is that there are, especially among those high-flying partnerships, there are community colleges and universities that are being more intentional about building additional pathways for those AAS students, and not just saying, okay, it's technically an applied or quote unquote terminal degree. It's saying, okay, our students are saying that they want this and that they need this for their upward mobility. So what is it that we can do to accommodate that? So I'd posit that to answer that question. And the other thing I'd say is that yes, there is an increased focus on these kind of workforce pathways, but when we look at the degree completion within community colleges across the states, I think it's something like, John, it might even exceed this. It's about 40% of all associate degrees completed every year are in liberal arts general studies. And that's been pretty consistent. And even if on the margins, there's kind of declines there, it's still a substantial portion of the community college graduating population. That's not even counting those that are not completing. And for those in general studies, the completion rates tend to be lower. So, yes, we've got to figure out what those pathways are for those more workforce-oriented programs, but there are a large number of students who are in those general studies, liberal arts programs that need attention. And the more structured the transfer pathway is, and I saw a question about majors. No, we were not looking at particular major pathways here in this research, but the more structured a transfer pathway is to support transfer within a major and bachelor's completion within a major, the higher the outcomes are that we've seen in other fieldwork and research that we've done.
And keep those questions coming in the Q&A, and I love the upvotes. That helps us too. Actually, some of them we're going to get to in the next one. So if we want to kind of go to this next strategy area, and I would say too, building off what you said, Tanya, yeah, so the associate degree, the most common major, like we do this exercise with community colleges all the time. The top program, aside from like high school dual enrollment, is general transfer associates of arts, general studies. And it's like, you know, it's just sort of like, well, who are those students? What are their goals? Is it clear to them what their path is leading to? Why would they want to be retained or want to stick around and complete if it's not clear? And those are important questions. And I think there has been this movement, it's been very much informed by our guided pathways reforms in the community college sector to really try to provide students more clarity earlier on and help them explore, not just sort of kick the can down the road, get your gen eds out of the way so you don't have to think about it. But no, let's like do active exploration through course taking, through advising early on. And I just saw a headline come across my desk from like a Houston local paper that was like, Houston Community College's largest program has been declining for years, and it's by design. And that's because it's reporting saying their largest program, the general studies associates, has been declining because there has been this concerted effort to get more students, not in that program, but into more clear major articulated pathways. So the associates in transfer for biology students or for business students. And I think I often hear that folks talk about students as like hiding out in that general associate's degree. And because they're, you know, those STEM transfers are in there somewhere, the psychology transfers, we don't know who they are, but you know, we think that they're figuring it out, but what we also know is that most students don't talk to an advisor from a college. They're just Googling stuff on Reddit. They're on their own for transfer, as our colleague Shuli Wong says from University of Madison. And so what we saw in the second strategy, and this is sort of building on what we learned in the first playbook, is this aligning the program pathways for transfer, both in terms of curricular alignment in the major, but also instructional or pedagogical alignment with a big focus on timely bachelor's completion. And I would just say this has been a lesson learned as we've studied guided pathways in community colleges, and it's true here that, you know, there's been a big focus on mapping the paths. And this for sure is important. And here are the finding is like creating clear 4-year sequences, the idealized sequence. How can a student get this done in 4 years from community college to a bachelor's degree? What are the courses that we would need to align? The faculty need to be figuring that out, building trust with themselves, and then talking about the teaching and the progression along the way. But of course, we know that very few students are going to follow that idealized 4-year sequence. In fact, we've done research to show that only all those students who transfer and complete a bachelor's, only 8% do the 2+2 sequence. So they're doing all sorts of different sequences. So the second essential practice here is an important follow-up, and one that we're really emphasizing here is that there's a systematic translation of the maps into individualized, tailored educational plans, where every student has like a different plan because, you know, I'm coming in with 15 credits and I can do part-time this semester, but I think I can do the January term and maybe I'll try to do full-time next fall. But it's like personalized, but it's based on that sort of idealized map in the major. And I think that this is where, you know, of course, many states have taken on the sort of major alignment work in states and systems. And good work has been happening, like real sort of dedicated, committed work. And where we've seen that can sort of fall short is then, well, do students know about that? Are advisors working with students to build on that map? Are universities accepting what has been agreed upon? You know, is there a process? So this practice around working with students early on, especially in their first term, first year, to develop their full program plan. You might think a lot of this falls on the community colleges, but I would like not leave the 4-year partners out of this, because if students are trying to explore their bachelor's and transfer destinations options, you know, and if we're saying let's do that on the front end, this is really hard to do if the universities are absent, or if the only university folks there are from the admissions office. And I think that a great example I love to lift up is, you know, the faculty member at the university who just would do Zoom open hour drop-ins for community college students interested in exploring and learning about the major. You know, what a like a low lift way for a student to be able to actually talk to a faculty member to think about the bachelor's degree major before they even transfer. So this is important because we know that students every student has a different plan. They need it to be customized. A lot of colleges were using their student success courses to be less about get to know college resources and more about let's explore and develop your personalized plan. And then to have this, in the system so students can track their progress towards the degree audits to see like how far along they are. And the sort of next level really kind of exciting, important work of this is then if every student has an individualized plan that's in the system, that puts colleges in the place of actually building their course schedules based on student plans. Because right now the practice is just, how do we set our course schedules for this year? What did we do last year? Let's roll that over. And that's been rolled over since like the beginning of time. But what would it be if students could actually take their courses and that they were scheduled based on how many students needed to take that course? So I think this idea of the four-year sequences, but the translation into tailored educational plans, all of that is about what courses your students are taking, but then what's happening in the courses. The sort of pedagogical alignment was also really shown through in these visits about strengthening instruction so students aren't just ready for the major, but are ready to succeed in those major courses at the university. And really good examples of this happening just when faculty are coming together, like when there's that priority in the first strategy from the institutions to get the faculty, to incentivize the faculty to really be together in the room talking about the teaching at the lower division and upper division level. And it just raises it, like some of the interesting examples was like I think it was like in chemistry. So the issue around, will students, when they come into the university chemistry courses, they don't know to be like suited up for labs like on the first day. And that is actually creating like a lot of issues because that wasn't the expectation in the community college. Or in the biology, they've been doing their labs like in just notebooks at the community college, but it's all Excel based at the university. And so like students need to not just know the concepts, but need to know like how to be, working on the assignments in a similar way. And that happens when there's a joint investment and sort of and conversations and trust building happening, not just in the sort of student services world, but in the faculty world as well. I think we have a moment to pause here to think about any reflections, but also checking in on time, Tanya, and deferring to you.
Sure. I'm just going through the questions now, trying to get to some through typing them in. And some in the chat. So a couple of things that I think someone asked for like an example of a transfer student process. And I think in the forthcoming playbook, we'll have some kind of maps of how different schools are achieving a particular process, whether that's like a transfer declaration process or a dual admissions process, that kind of thing. In terms of the pathways, we will also have examples from some of the schools about how they are how they're visualizing or taking the resources, taking the pathways and then making them student facing. So that will be available as well. And the last thing that I want to say, I know there's a lot of conversation about kind of 2+2 pathways, major specific pathways. I think one of the things that we realized in kind of going through the actual pathways that the schools had produced, what really set specific partnerships apart was not that they created these four-year maps. It's that these four-year maps included pathways that allowed students to complete their majors within 4 years realistically. And what I mean by that is that, there are some major specific pathways that we look at a state level sometimes. For instance, biology. You'll have a biology pathway that will have 2 biology courses in it. The first year sequence, the first intro bio, and then the next one after that. The student will take no other biology courses throughout their time in community college, and all of the other major specific courses, their major electives, will all happen at the 4-year institution. And you know that those are high degree of difficulty courses. So no, it is not actually a 2+2 pathway if the student is completing just 2 major specific courses, some degree requirements, and general education, if it is not actually feasible for a student to finish that major specific coursework at the 4-year institution in 2 years without being overburdened with high degree of difficulty courses. And I think the exemplars that were in our research were really attentive to that, to make sure that when students did the 2 in the community college, it was so that they were graduating as juniors within a major, not just juniors according to the number of credits that they accumulated. And that was a real difference maker in terms of what we think of as 2+2 pathways and what are actually 2+2 pathways. Okay. So the last strategy is tailored transfer advising and non-academic supports to foster trust and engagement. Again, this goes hand in hand with this idea of end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience. It's not enough to be able to address financial aid. It's not enough to build the pathways. We've got to provide the helping hand to students either through the academic pathways, with academic supports, or all of the other non-academic supports that are important to address the holistic needs of students broadly, but transfer students specifically. And so what this looked like at the exemplar campuses, early, sustained, and inevitable advising systems from starting in high school in many cases, all through community college, making advising inescapable. I think it's Ceci has the stat that 48% of transfer intending students, or nearly half, don't ever seek out support from transfer services. And they're doing it on their own. And so how do you make it as a college inescapable for a student to get support from a human who can help them navigate sometimes what are challenging pathways, or even not challenging pathways? And how do you continue that and work together as partners between the community college and the 4-year institution to sustain that through the transition and all the way through graduating with a bachelor's? The second is a trained, knowledgeable, and caring advising corps. So you can have really good individual advisors, but it's really important, if we're going to get to the level of scaled change that we want, that this is not happening by happy accident. Can we make sure that we have the technology in place, the processes in place, but also the training in place for advisors to be the best advisors that they can be? Because I bet there are many advisors on this call right now. You're doing as much as you can, and you know as much as you can. So what kind of support can the institution provide you to be able to be as effective as you can be? And the third is a transfer specific approach to holistic success. And what we meant by that, or what the examples we found, were quick on-ramps to career advising and high impact experiences at both the community college and the university. So again, going beyond this academic experience, and how can you create these non-academic experiences that enhance the student's full education? Activities that foster community building, belonging, and inclusion, informed by the transfer student population at the community college and the 4-year institution. Again, going back to that end-to-end redesign of the transfer student experience and extending beyond credit articulation, transfer students, they're humans. They want to belong. They want to feel like they fit in at their institutions. And then how can we enable that through programming? And then finally, attention to transfer students' basic and non-academic needs. When we look at the community college student population, 2/3 of them come from the bottom half of the income distribution, and you know, the bottom half, meaning that, you know, they tend to be lower income. And so these basic needs services, these non-academic supports, are really crucial. You know, in many cases, they can do the academic work, but they need that support outside of the classroom in order to really thrive in their academics. So that's it at a high level. Again, we're going to be inviting those who are featured in the playbook to share their insights, their examples that reflect the framework and the insights here. But want to take the remaining time to take any questions that you might have about the high-level framework, or anything that you've heard today. But John, any other thoughts before we dive into the questions?
Yeah, keep the questions coming, everybody, and just love to see the sort of information resource sharing in the chat because I really think that there's so much knowledge in this community here. Just looking at the top upvoted question here, difference between a structured pathway and articulation agreement. We find that like the articulation agreements, they do obviously serve a purpose, but they're legal documents, and students aren't really consulting with them. One study did an analysis found that you needed like a 16th grade reading level to understand these. You have to be like a lawyer. So the structured pathways are like kind of the maps or the sort of guides, like Alamo has these transfer advising guides. They're designed to be much more student facing, advisor facing resources that build on the sort of agreements in the articulation agreements. I would just offer too, I mean, we can go through the questions, but one, for folks that are, we'll have this playbook out. Tanya, there's questions about like when should folks expect to see it? We're really kind of in the final stages here. One thing I would encourage you all to think about like using this is definitely like there may be things in here that you're doing. There may be things in here that that you could think about, oh, like would this work at my institution or my partnership? But I think that in some ways, this really kind of helps to do internal advocacy around like this is a set of like research-based guidance, and we have a lot of good dedicated work happening around advising, but this sort of second area around the pathways, we haven't been able to get our faculty together working with our community colleges. Like, this is a key component here, and it seems like it's missing, and this is like in this like sort of research. So I think it can really support perhaps things that you already know, like you need to advocate for, but kind of gives you a way to sort of be like, this is missing here. And I think a lot of times this comes down to the first one, which is about prioritization, leadership, investment. Is it there or not? Especially at the four-year institutions, where there's a lot of other things, that could be prioritized. And we know that sort of prioritization from the four-year institution and its translation into the faculty and academic departments can really make a huge difference here.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of second what John is saying is that, what we found is that these kind of faculty relationship building opportunities are really crucial, and that when you have executive level support for that, you can do that across a partnership, across multiple or all disciplines. However, what we also found in our research was that that was happening in pockets for years at most of the partnerships and universities before executive level leaders stepped in to institutionalize it. So even if you can't influence all of the faculty at your institution, can you get to a department, a program, where you can bring faculty together from the community college and the four-year institution and start to broker some of those pathways that kind of meet the standard for timely transfer and bachelor's completion. And then, what we saw happen at these exemplars was that had a snowball effect. When the right leadership came in, recognized how important that work was and how effective it was for those specific programs, then they said, let's do this across all of our disciplines. And so even if you can make a small change now, it can amount to a transformational change later down the line.
Right on. I love all the cheers for Holly's hierarchy in the chat too. This is so funny. It's got good alliteration. The first top upvoted question talks about credential attainment is the priority and primary focus of many community colleges. Transfer might not be on the radar. I don't know if this is referring to the radar of community colleges or university leadership, but just to talk to more like what is the case making potential here for both community college and university leadership. I think first for community colleges, this will be an easier case to make because transfer is such a core part of the mission at most community colleges. And if community colleges are taking responsibility for post-completion success, like what's happening, the value added to students after they complete, ensuring a bachelor's completion is a huge boon for that, given the sort of good job access and et cetera. For the university side, I think, one big in here, is the sort of enrollment angle. And, many universities are themselves struggling for enrollments. And I would say to their community college colleagues too, if you're having a hard time getting your university partners to really invest outside of the admissions area even, but like invest at more the academic or student services level, I think you have a lot of power in terms of, the sort of students and the partnerships that you build, and the sort of supply of talented students that are doing well at these universities. And I think that can be wielded more, both with your university partners, to get more investment from senior leadership at the university level. And there's a lot of like technical challenges being raised here that are very important. STEM alignment, chem associates and chem bachelors, like a lot of technical logistical things that we've seen, like this can be fixed, it can be addressed. But there has to be the will and prioritization there. It's that old adage, where there's a will, there's a way. But if you don't have that investment of time, resources, individuals at all levels, including the senior leadership, it's hard to get to the solutions of those specific challenges.
And I know there's been a bit of chatter in the Q&A. So, what if you can't get to a true 2+2, within a major between partners? And one of the things that we recommend and that the exemplars were exploring in our research were alternative pathway setup. So 1+3, 3+1, whatever it may be, but really prioritizing that timely completion and that affordable completion so that students weren't taking extra credits and spending kind of time and money that honestly they didn't have. And so, I also noticed another kind of comment in the, hi Alexa, it's good to have you here with us. But another comment in the questions about, how sometimes community colleges, don't want students to get kind of poached too early. And I think this is where we find like, okay, giving credit to community colleges after a student transfers, once they kind of get to the, to satisfy the associate degree requirements, and then giving credit to the community college. That's one way to alleviate that. But by and large, for the most part, where you can develop these 2+2 pathways where students are completing their associate degree before going to the four-year institution, that's a real good way to broker trust. And the last, just to build on John's comment about, the enrollment pressures at four-year institutions. Four-year institutions are very worried about the upcoming demographic cliff, and they are hungry for other kinds of what I was literally at a meeting with a bunch of presidents today. They call them new markets. And I laugh a little bit because I'm like, community college transfer isn't really a new market, but for many of them, it is a new opportunity. And so, and one that is becoming much more appealing to them given the revenue and enrollment pressures that they're going to face over the next 15 years, when there's going to be a decline in high school graduates of about 500,000 by the time kind of 2041 hits. So use that to your advantage. And where there is kind of a lot of demand is especially in kind of smaller private institutions because they're very enrollment sensitive, and go where is going to be most friendly to your students is what I'd say to the community colleges. And that creates some market pressure for other institutions that might not be so willing initially, but maybe later down the line.
Well, I am overwhelmed by the information that has been shared today. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, John. I encourage all of you, this recording will be sent out next week. I encourage you to watch this again, because if you're like me, there was so much additional data offered in between. There's so much of the statistics and the research that both John and Tanya shared that I think really will help you in making that case. We talk a lot about how do you get buy-in, and sometimes that's really hard. If you look at this presentation one more time, you're going to get several nuggets that will help you in developing your conversation around why transfer is important, why a prioritization of transfer is important. And then again, all of the different ideas that have come through today have just been so rich. Thank you for everyone who has contributed to the chat. As John said, it has been a mighty chat. There has been so much going on back and forth, and it just makes our hearts sing. As Tanya mentioned, this is just the first of 4, and the next 3 of our webinars will really be focused on those partnerships and those case studies, and really helping you dig into how to do what it is that has made such a difference on many, many campuses. So we will encourage you to continue to look out for more information around that. You'll see here that there's a ton of resources that have been provided for you. So get those QR codes and link to that information, if you will. And finally, I just want you to take a minute and next week, think about transfer. We had hoped to be with all of you in Oregon, hanging out with our friend Rick, and we won't be there. But that doesn't mean that we don't think about transfer and we don't talk about transfer. I encourage you to take a look at the Transfer Nation team and what they have on their calendars next week for programming to kind of fill in the gaps just a little bit. But know that we as NISTS are still here for you. Emily's given you lots of opportunities to say, hey, come write a blog for us. Come let us know how we can uplift your work, which is what we really wanted to do today. The Transfer Playbook 2.0 is going to be an amazing resource to all of us in the field. And as you heard Tanya say, 200 hours of research. And that's just like the on the ground field research, not to mention all the data analysis that went into it before that. It was a yeoman's work, heavy lift. And we are so grateful both to you, Tanya, John, your colleagues that have put this together, because it is critical for the work that we do. Thank you all for your time today. Have a great rest of your day, and we heart transfers.